The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of the modest two-story home in Dover, Delaware, casting long shadows across the maple table where Sarah Mitchell sat with a cup of cold coffee. It was 6 in the morning, and she hadn't slept. How could she? Her daughter Emma was graduating from high school today, and Sarah's mind kept wandering back through 18 years of memories, late-night homework sessions, scraped knees, school plays, first heartbreaks, and so many sacrifices she'd made to get her through. Sarah was 46 years old, and the years showed in the small lines around her eyes and the premature gray threading through her dark hair. But her posture was still military straight, her movements efficient and purposeful. She had spent 23 years in the United States Navy as a medical officer, rising to the rank of commander. She had served on 3 deployments, been shot at twice, and lost friends whose names she carried in her heart every single day. She looked down at the tattoo on her left forearm, a Navy Medical Corps emblem intertwined with a date, August 15, 2009. That date marked the day she'd lost her husband, Michael, Emma's father, in a helicopter accident during his deployment. Michael had been a Navy SEAL, one of the best. Emma had been 3 years old when she got the call that changed everything. Sarah had gotten the tattoo 2 years later, a private memorial that only a few people understood. "Mom." Emma's voice came from upstairs, muffled by the bedroom door and hallway. "Are you awake?" Sarah smiled, even though her eyes had started to water. "Yeah, baby. I'm down here." Emma came down the stairs in her pajamas, her blonde hair, Michael's blonde hair, falling in waves to her shoulders. She was a beautiful young woman, kind and smart, with her father's courage and her mother's determination. She had gotten into Georgetown University on a full scholarship, something that made Sarah's heart burst with pride and ache with the knowledge that Michael would never meet his daughter as an adult. "I'm nervous," Emma said, sitting down across from her mother and helping herself to some orange juice. "About graduation?" Sarah asked. "About everything," Emma said, looking at her mother with the kind of vulnerability that made Sarah remember she was still just 18. "It feels like the end of something." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "It is the end. But it's also the beginning. You're going to do amazing things, Emma. I know you will." They sat together in the quiet morning, not needing to say much more. This was their way, they were comfortable in silence, two people who had learned to endure and survive together. Sarah had never wanted Emma to feel like she was a burden or a responsibility that forced her to stay small. Instead, she had tried to show her daughter, every single day, that you could lose everything and still stand back up. You could be broken and still be strong. You could miss someone so much it hurt, but still smile and keep moving forward. The graduation ceremony was held at Thomas McKean High School at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The gymnasium was packed with families, grandparents, younger siblings, and extended relatives, all crammed onto bleachers and folding chairs. The air conditioning was struggling against the June heat, and the smell of flowers and new clothes mixed together in a way that would always remind Sarah of this moment. Emma sat in the alphabetical rows with the other seniors, looking both terrified and proud in her blue cap and gown. Sarah sat in the third row back, wearing a simple navy blue sundress and sandals. She had been to many military ceremonies, promotions, retirements, funerals, but nothing felt as significant as this. This was about life, growth, and the future. This was about the daughter she had raised alone, the daughter who was going to change the world. The ceremony proceeded with the usual speeches from the principal and valedictorian. Sarah barely heard them. She was too busy watching her daughter, thinking about how fast it had gone, how much Emma had grown, how proud Michael would have been. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the man who had entered the gymnasium through the side door, searching the crowd. Rear Admiral James Caldwell was 63 years old, and he had been attending military-related graduations in the Delaware area for the past 10 years. It was one of his volunteer commitments, recognizing high school graduates who were entering the military or the military academies. The high school had invited him specifically to present a small award to one graduating senior. He was standing near the stage, waiting for his moment, when his eyes caught a flash of blue in the third row. At first, it was just a color. Then it was a tattoo on a woman's forearm. Then it was a memory that slammed into him like a physical force, knocking the breath from his lungs. Admiral Caldwell had served in the Navy for 42 years. He had commanded 5 ships, led hundreds of operations, and had the kind of military record that was studied in academies across the country. But there was one moment in his career that he had spent every day since trying to forget, and every night since trying to justify. The tattoo he had glimpsed, the Navy Medical Corps emblem with the date August 15, 2009, belonged to a ghost from his past. A ghost he thought he had successfully buried. He stared at the woman in the third row, trying to see her face. When she turned her head, even at this distance, even after nearly 20 years of them not seeing each other, he knew exactly who she was. Commander Sarah Mitchell. His hand went to his chest, and he felt his heart rate accelerate in a way that had nothing to do with his physical fitness level. His face went pale, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He had to sit down. He found an empty chair near the back and lowered himself into it, his eyes never leaving the woman in the third row. Admiral Caldwell had made a choice in 2009. It was a choice that had advanced his career significantly. It was a choice that had led to a cover-up, an official narrative that wasn't quite true, and the destruction of a family. It was a choice that had kept him up at night for 15 years, though he had become very good at not thinking about it during the day. And now, here she was, at her daughter's graduation, unaware that the person responsible for her husband's death, the person responsible for the lie that had been told about how he died, was sitting just 50 feet away from her. The ceremony continued. The graduates walked across the stage. Emma walked across the stage, and Sarah stood and cheered louder than anyone else, tears streaming down her face. It was a perfect moment, and Sarah was completely present in it. Admiral Caldwell did not cheer. He watched Sarah with the intensity of a man who had just discovered that his past was about to catch up with him. He watched as she hugged her daughter in the crowd afterward. He watched as they took photographs together. And he watched as Sarah lifted her sleeve absently to wipe away a tear, and the tattoo, his tattoo of guilt, flashed in the afternoon light. Sarah and Emma made their way through the crowd outside the gymnasium, weaving between families taking photographs and groups of friends making plans for the evening. Emma's best friend Jasmine had spotted them from across the parking lot and was running toward them with her mother close behind. The girls embraced, jumping up and down with the kind of joy that only 18-year-olds could muster. "We're going to Rosie's for dinner," Jasmine's mother called out. "Can Emma join us?" Sarah looked at Emma, who was looking back at her with hope in her eyes. Sarah nodded. "Go ahead, baby. Have fun. I'll pick you up at 8. Emma hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for everything, Mom. I mean it. I know today wasn't easy for you." Sarah held her daughter close for a moment, breathing in the familiar smell of her hair, remembering what it felt like to need to protect her, to keep her safe. That job was never really over, she thought. It just changed shape. "I'm so proud of you," Sarah whispered. "I love you so much." "Love you too," Emma said, pulling away. She and Jasmine linked arms and headed toward the parking lot, their laughter floating back to where Sarah stood. Sarah turned and started walking toward her car, a practical 10-year-old Honda Civic. She had her keys in her hand and her mind on the simple dinner she would make for herself, probably just some pasta and a salad, when she heard a voice behind her. "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell?" Sarah turned around. Behind her stood a tall man in a perfectly pressed navy dress uniform, complete with ribbons and insignia that told Sarah he was a very important person. His face was familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. His salt and pepper hair and the lines around his eyes suggested someone in his 60s. But something about his expression was off. He looked pale, and there was a tremor in his hand as he extended it toward her. "Yes," Sarah said, taking his hand in her own. Her Navy training made her notice everything about him: his grip was too tight, his breathing was shallow, and his pupils were dilated. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Admiral James Caldwell," he said, dropping her hand. "I was presenting an award today, and I recognized you." Sarah's mind started cataloging her memories. Caldwell. The name meant something. She was sure of it. But from where? "I'm not sure we've met," she said politely. The Admiral looked around the parking lot, which was emptying out as families headed to their celebrations. His jaw clenched. "We have. In 2008. At Naval Base Little Creek, Virginia. You were at a medical conference, and I was serving in operations." The memory came then, sudden and sharp. Sarah had been at a small conference at Little Creek. She had presented a paper on combat medicine protocols. And there had been a young admiral then, not young, but younger, who had attended her presentation. He had asked challenging questions. She remembered thinking he was intelligent and thorough. But that wasn't why her stomach had just dropped. In 2009, right after Michael died, there had been an investigation. A standard military investigation into the helicopter crash. Sarah had been given a briefing about the findings. The official story was that Michael's team had been conducting a routine operation when mechanical failure caused the helicopter to go down. Pilot error had been ruled out. Equipment failure had been ruled out. The investigation had concluded that it was a tragic accident. But Michael had called her the night before the crash. It was a rare phone call, usually he could only text. He had sounded stressed. He had told her that their mission was being changed at the last minute, and the change made him uncomfortable. He had said something about the chain of command making a decision that might put the team at risk. Sarah had never understood what he meant. The investigation had concluded before she could ask more questions. And she had learned to live with the uncertainty, because military wives learn that there are things you will never know, things that are above your clearance level, things that are classified. But she had always wondered. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I remember you." "I need to talk to you about Michael," Admiral Caldwell said. His voice was low, and there was an urgency to it that made Sarah's instincts go on high alert. "Not here. Somewhere private. I think you deserve to know the truth about what happened." Sarah's entire body went rigid. "What are you talking about?" "Not here," the Admiral repeated, glancing around. "Can I give you my number? Can we meet tomorrow? There are things that were never made public. Things that I have carried for a long time." Sarah's mind was suddenly spinning. She had spent 15 years learning to accept what she had been told about Michael's death. She had spent 15 years building a life for herself and Emma. She had moved on. She had healed. Or at least, she thought she had. "Tell me now," she said. The Admiral looked conflicted. He rubbed his face with his hands. "I can't. Not here. There are military protocols, and if I tell you wrong, if I don't give you the complete picture, you'll get hurt again. Just meet with me tomorrow. 1 hour. That's all I'm asking." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. But something in his expression, the genuine pain, the obvious guilt, the weight of whatever secret he had been carrying, made her pause. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not 15 years ago?" "Because I didn't have the courage," he said simply. "And because I was afraid of what would happen to my career. I chose advancement over truth. I've regretted it every day since." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she took the business card he was offering and walked to her car without another word. That night, she sat in her living room with a glass of wine and searched the internet for Admiral James Caldwell. His Wikipedia page came up immediately. His service record was stellar. He had been Deputy Commander of Naval Operations. He had received multiple commendations. He had served on multiple Joint Chiefs Committees. But 15 years ago, according to the timeline, he had been stationed at Little Creek. He had been involved in special operations planning. Sarah knew that Michael's team had been under the operational command of someone at that level. She had never been told who, but she had seen the redacted name in the official documentation. She looked at the graduation photo on her mantle, Emma in her cap and gown, her whole life ahead of her. Then she looked at the other photo, the one of Michael in his SEAL Team 6 uniform, taken just weeks before the crash. And she made a decision. She would meet with Admiral Caldwell. Because if there was even a chance that she had been lied to, that Michael's death was not the simple tragedy she had been told it was, then she needed to know. Even if knowing meant her entire world would have to shift again. The coffee shop was called Brood Awakening, a small local place in downtown Dover that Sarah had never been to before. She had chosen it specifically because it was neutral territory, far enough from her home and Emma's school that she was unlikely to run into anyone she knew. She arrived at 9 in the morning, ordered a black coffee, and sat in a corner booth with her back to the wall, a habit from her Navy days that she had never shaken. Admiral Caldwell arrived at 9:15, again in his dress uniform. Sarah wondered if he had worn it deliberately, as a reminder of his authority, or if he simply wore it every day out of habit. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down across from her. He ordered a coffee from the waitress, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted the menu. "I'm not here to thank you," Sarah said. "I'm here to understand why you're suddenly interested in telling the truth after all these years. So start talking." The Admiral took a long breath. "I'm retiring in 6 months. After 42 years in the Navy, I'm done. I've done a lot of good work, Sarah. I've commanded brave sailors. I've made strategic decisions that have protected people. But I've also made one decision that has haunted me. And I can't go into retirement without at least trying to make it right." "What decision?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. "The decision to support a lie," Caldwell said. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "In 2009, your husband's team was assigned a mission. I was part of the planning committee. The operation was originally designed to do one thing: gather intelligence on a facility in the region. It was a non-combat mission. Reconnaissance only." Sarah waited. She had learned long ago that sometimes people needed silence to confess. "But there was political pressure," Caldwell continued. "Pressure from above my level. Pressure to turn that intelligence-gathering mission into something more. There were people who wanted us to take direct action against targets that we had identified. It was a high-risk decision. I raised concerns in the planning meetings. Your husband, Michael, raised concerns too. I saw the memo he submitted. He wanted more support, better equipment, and a delay in the timeline to do more preparation. But the mission went ahead," Sarah said. "It wasn't a question. The mission went ahead," Caldwell confirmed. "And I allowed it to go ahead. I could have stopped it. I could have used my position to escalate the concerns, to push back harder against the pressure. But I didn't. I rationalized it. I told myself that these were risks that SEALs accepted, that Michael and his team were the best trained operators in the world, and that we had done everything we could to make it work." "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice very quiet. "The helicopter that was supposed to provide support was delayed by bad weather. The extraction team was delayed by road conditions. Michael's team went in on time because the window was closing, but the backup wasn't there. They encountered resistance they weren't expecting. More resistance than intelligence had suggested. And when they called for extraction, the support wasn't in position." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Her husband had called for help that wasn't there. He had waited for backup that wasn't coming. He had died because of that. The official report, Caldwell continued, said the helicopter had mechanical failure. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I had seen the maintenance records. The helicopter had been cleared for flight. The failure was in the operational planning, not in the equipment. But admitting that would have meant admitting that the mission plan had been flawed, that the political pressure had caused us to rush into something that wasn't ready. Who pushed back? Sarah asked. Who was the pressure coming from? Caldwell shook his head. That I can't tell you. Not because of classified information, but because it goes higher than I was willing to investigate at the time. And frankly, the people who pushed for that mission are still in positions of power. If I expose them now, it will become a political nightmare, and that's not fair to you. But what I can tell you is that Michael's death was not a tragic accident. It was the result of a calculated decision to prioritize political goals over operational safety. Sarah stood up. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to not be in this coffee shop hearing words that were unraveling 15 years of carefully constructed acceptance. I'm sorry, Caldwell said. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back, Sarah said. Sorry doesn't unraise our daughter alone. Sorry doesn't give Emma a father. She sat back down because her legs wouldn't support her anymore. What do you want from me? She asked. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's the right thing to do, Caldwell said. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I'm hoping that you might help me make this public before I retire. Not for my sake, I know my career is probably over once this comes out. But for Michael's memory. And for the other families who lost people in operations that were planned poorly and executed under pressure. There have been others since Michael. And there might be more if this doesn't change. Sarah looked at this man across from her. She could see the cost of his confession in his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hands shook. There was genuine pain in his eyes. But that didn't change what had happened. I need time to think, she said. I need to talk to people who might help me verify what you're saying. And I need to figure out how to tell my daughter that everything she was told about her father's death was at least partially a lie. I understand, Caldwell said. He pulled out a folder from the bag he had brought. These are copies of documents. Some of them are classified, so you'll need to be careful with them. But they will back up everything I've said. Sarah took the folder. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than just paper should be. If you decide to move forward, Caldwell said, I have a lawyer who specializes in military cases. I'll cover all the costs. And I'll testify to everything I've told you. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She left the coffee shop and drove aimlessly for an hour, her mind unable to settle on any single thought. She ended up at the cemetery where Michael was buried, a quiet place on the edge of Dover where military veterans were honored. She stood at his grave and looked at his name on the headstone, along with the dates of his birth and death. All of his life, reduced to 2 numbers. I don't know what to do, she said aloud, something she had never done before. I don't know if I want to open this up. We were okay. We were healing. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They hadn't been healing. They had just been surviving. And maybe it was time to do more than that. For 2 weeks, Sarah did nothing. She read through the documents Admiral Caldwell had given her over and over, checking facts, cross-referencing dates, and verifying information. She was careful not to tell Emma what she was doing. Her daughter was in the final stages of preparing for college, and Sarah didn't want to add the burden of this truth to Emma's shoulders, not yet. What she did instead was reach out to people she had known during her Navy career. She called an old friend, Commander Patricia Hayes, who still worked in naval operations. She asked careful questions, phrased in ways that wouldn't raise red flags. She requested unclassified documents about standard helicopter maintenance protocols and timelines for missions in the region where Michael had died. Patricia called her back. Sarah, I'm not supposed to be looking into this, but I did a little digging. I don't know why you're asking, but I found something interesting. The maintenance records for that helicopter were revised. The original records showed some minor issues. They were corrected in the system about 3 weeks after the crash. That was the confirmation Sarah needed. The documents Admiral Caldwell had given her were accurate. She also contacted a law firm in Washington, D.C. that specialized in military accountability cases. The lawyer she spoke with, a woman named Margaret Chen, listened carefully to what Sarah was telling her and then said something that made Sarah's breath catch. "What you're describing is not unusual," Margaret said. "We've seen it multiple times. Military operations that are politically motivated, that pressure families to accept false official narratives. If you want to pursue this, I need to warn you that it will not be easy. You will face institutional resistance. There will be people who want you to stay quiet. But if you want the truth, and if you want accountability, it's possible." Sarah thought about Emma. She thought about raising her daughter to stand up for what was right. She thought about all the times she had told Emma that courage meant doing hard things, not the easy things. On the evening of the second Sunday, Sarah made the call. She asked Emma to come sit with her on the porch. It was a warm evening, and the sun was setting over their quiet suburban street. Emma brought 2 glasses of iced tea, and they sat in the rocking chairs that had been part of their home for so long. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said. "And I need you to listen without interrupting until I'm done." Emma looked worried. She set down her tea. "Okay." Sarah told her daughter everything. She told her about the meeting with Admiral Caldwell. She told her about the documents and the revised maintenance records. She told her about the political pressure and the rushed mission. She told her about how Michael had expressed concerns that had been ignored. When she finished, Emma was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Dad knew the mission was dangerous." "Yes," Sarah said. "And he said so. But his concerns were overridden." "By who?" Emma asked. "That's the part one still don't know," Sarah said. "But I'm going to find out. I'm going to try, anyway. And I need to know if you're okay with that. Because doing this will mean that people will ask questions, that will both be in the public eye for a while, and that there might be consequences I can't predict." Emma looked at her mother. Sarah could see the moment her daughter transitioned from the 18-year-old girl who was leaving for college to the young woman she was becoming. Emma had her father's courage, Sarah realized. It was right there in her face. "What would Dad want you to do?" Emma asked. Sarah had asked herself that question so many times. And she knew the answer. "He would want the truth to come out," she said. "He would want me to be brave." "Then that's what we're going to do," Emma said. She reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "We're going to be brave. Together." 6 months later, the story broke on the front page of the Washington Post. The headline read, "Navy cover-up of SEAL team failure exposed, 15-year-old crash revealed to be result of political pressure, not mechanical failure." The article detailed Admiral Caldwell's testimony, the documents he had preserved, and the interviews that Margaret Chen's law firm had conducted with other sailors and officers who had been involved in the original investigation. It exposed the fact that maintenance records had been altered, that the helicopter had actually been in perfect working condition, and that the real cause of the crash was an operation that had been approved despite serious safety concerns. The story went viral. News networks picked it up. Cable news channels ran special reports. Congress initiated an investigation. For Sarah, the aftermath was chaos. News vans parked on her street. Reporters knocked on her door. She received hate mail from people who believed she was damaging the Navy's reputation. But she also received thousands of letters from other military families who had lost loved ones, families who thanked her for having the courage to challenge the official narrative. Admiral Caldwell had been right about one thing: his career was over. He was court-martialed for his role in the cover-up. He was dishonorably discharged and spent 18 months in military prison. But before the trial, he had made a statement that Sarah would never forget. Standing in court, he had looked directly at her and said, "I should have been brave 15 years ago. Commander Mitchell has shown me what real courage looks like." The investigation went higher than Caldwell. 3 senior military officials lost their positions. A congressional committee recommended significant changes to how military operations were approved and overseen. Michael's service record was officially updated to reflect the truth about his death. A memorial to the sailors who had died in that operation was dedicated in Michael's hometown. On the day of the memorial dedication, Sarah stood with Emma, both of them wearing navy dress whites for the first time in years. Emma was there representing her father, and Sarah was there representing all of the families who had been failed by the system. The governor of Delaware gave a speech. A congressman gave a speech. Military leadership gave a speech. But the speech that mattered most was the one that Sarah's mother gave. She stood in front of 50 families, in front of the memorial with Michael's name carved into the marble, and she told the story of her husband. Not the classified version or the official version, but the true version. She talked about his concerns. She talked about his love for his team. She talked about how he had believed that the mission was the right thing to do, even though he had doubts, because he trusted the people above him. What Michael didn't know, Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, was that trust was misplaced. His concerns were valid. His fears for his team were justified. But he went anyway, because that's what Navy SEALs do. They trust the chain of command, and they go. She paused, looking out at the faces of the families. Michael's death doesn't have to have been in vain, she continued. The lessons from what happened can change things. They can make it so that other young sailors, other fathers and mothers, don't have to be lost because of political pressure or institutional cowardice. That's the only way I know how to honor him. Not with words or monuments, but with action. With change. The applause that followed was thunderous and heartfelt. That evening, after the ceremony, Sarah and Emma sat alone at Michael's grave. Emma brought flowers, as she did every year on the anniversary of his death. But this year felt different. This year, the grave was marked not just with his name, but with the truth of his life and death. Do you feel differently about him now? Sarah asked Emma. Emma thought for a moment. I feel like I know him better, she said finally. I know he was brave, like you. But I also know he was just a person. He had doubts. He was scared sometimes. And that makes him real to me, in a way he wasn't before. Sarah put her arm around her daughter, and they stood together in the fading light. 3 months later, Emma left for Georgetown University. She had decided to pursue a degree in military law and policy, inspired by the events of the previous year. Before she left, she asked her mother one question. Do you regret it? Emma asked. All the upheaval, all the publicity, all of it. Do you wish you had just let it stay buried? Sarah thought about her husband. She thought about the 15 years she had spent carrying questions without answers. She thought about the strength she had found in finally telling the truth, and the way it had brought her and her daughter closer together. No, she said. I don't regret it at all. Your father deserves to be remembered for who he really was. And you deserve to grow up knowing the complete truth about him. That's worth any amount of upheaval. 3 years later, Sarah received a phone call. It was Admiral Caldwell. He was being released from prison early for good behavior, and he wanted to meet with Sarah one more time. They met at the same coffee shop where he had first confessed to her. Caldwell looked smaller somehow, diminished by his time in prison. His hair had turned completely white. But his eyes were clear, and there was a peace in his expression that Sarah recognized. It was the peace of a person who had finally put down a heavy burden. I wanted to thank you, he said. For doing what I was too afraid to do. For showing the world what truth looks like. I didn't do it for you, Sarah said. I did it for Michael. And for Emma. I know, Caldwell said. That's what makes it real. They didn't become friends. The gulf between them was too wide, and the past couldn't be rewritten. But they achieved something that Sarah had not expected, they achieved understanding. Caldwell had made choices that had led to tragedy. Sarah had been forced to live with those choices. But in the end, Both of them had chosen to do the right thing, even though it was hard. Sarah never remarried. She focused her energy on her work and on supporting Emma through college and into her career in military law. Together, they became advocates for military families, speaking at conferences and helping to push for reforms in how military operations were approved and overseen. On the 15th anniversary of Michael's death, a documentary was released about what had happened. It was titled The Truth Delayed, and it told the story of Sarah's journey from confused widow to advocate for change. It won a major film festival award and was nominated for a television award. At the award ceremony, Sarah sat in the audience with Emma, who was now 28 years old and working as a military law attorney. When the documentary won, Emma stood and applauded her mother, and Sarah felt tears of pride streaming down her face. But the real victory, Sarah knew, was not in any award or documentary. The real victory was in the fact that Michael's death had led to change. It was in the fact that other families had been spared the confusion and pain that she and Emma had endured. It was in the fact that Emma had grown up to be a strong woman who fought for what was right, just like her father had. As Sarah left the award ceremony, she looked down at the tattoo on her forearm. The Navy Medical Corps emblem. The date, August 15, 2009. For so many years, it had been a symbol of pain and loss. But now, it was something else. It was a reminder that even when the world tells you to accept a lie, you can choose truth. Even when you're tired and broken, you can choose to fight. And even when everything is taken from you, you can still be strong. Michael had taught her that, in the end. His legacy wasn't in the classified operations or the redacted documents. His legacy was in the daughter he had left behind, and in the mother who had found the courage to tell the world his story. And that, Sarah thought as she walked out into the night air, was something that nobody could ever take away.